First of all, I have to thank the Hutchinsons for hosting me, Fontana Sports. It's nice to see a good mom and pop shop that's like has that much history. So let's see if this works. So it's really great to be back in the Midwest. I grew up in Minnesota, and it has, the Midwest has a special place in my heart, and I rarely get to come back. So it's really great to be here. I wish I could spend a couple more days, actually, but tonight I'm really just going to try and give you a sense of the work that I do and a bit of, the creative process behind photography and the filmmaking that I do, and kind of give you a little bit of background on how I got there. I think a lot of people wonder how someone that grew up in the middle of a lot of cornfields ended up being an alpinist, and I often ask myself the same question. But I do explain to people that actually the coldest I have ever been was standing, at the bus stop in Minnesota with like my jean jacket on, waiting for the bus in January, and standing there with my friends with my hands in my pocket, pretending I wasn't cold. And you do a lot of that as a professional climber. You stand around freezing, pretending you're not very cold, and looking around at your partner and being like, I'm not cold, are you cold? So I did have a little bit of training. People ask what exactly do you do, and it's often kind of, I have a hard time explaining it, but since I have your attention, I guess I can tell you. I see my work split into kind of three categories, and one is a photographer, and I shoot both commercial and editorial work. So, for the North Face, obviously, and then outside and National Geographic for editorial work. So then, of course, I work as an athlete for the North Face, and this is my 12th year on the team with them, and that's been an incredible journey. It's a lot of trips in the last 12 years. And then I began filming under the mentorship of David Brashears and Rick Ridgway about 10 years ago, and kind of off and on, but then, more so in the last probably 5 years, more seriously. My work takes me to some pretty intense places, and it's kind of always ongoing. And I was just, I live part-time in New York City, and then last minute, I got a call to go do a shoot up in British Columbia, and it's always interesting to fly from Manhattan, drive for a couple hours, and then end up here, which is where I was for about 4 or 5 days, shooting a commercial. And then flying back to New York, and then flying here. But that's a lot of what ends up happening is, at the point in my career right now, I kind of get the call where it's like this, we have this like outrageous, impossible thing we need set up, and then I get these calls that are usually pretty interesting, and a lot of planning and logistics, and taking the photo or getting the footage is oftentimes not the hard part, because by the time, it's hard to take a bad picture when you actually are in a place like this. So a lot of my work entails getting to the spot. that's, I'll come back to this photo in a little bit, but that's about 50 feet below the summit of Everest. And a lot of the work I do is, you know, about sharing the experiences of my peers and the people that are my friends and that I work with, and that was the original kind of inspiration, and I can go into that a little bit, but first of all, that's my backyard in Minnesota, and people often ask me, like, where did you get your drive and tenacity, and I often look back, and my mother was a librarian at the university, Minnesota State University, but she was this incredibly strong woman and strong-willed, and I have a great story about her. When I first went to Pakistan, I was probably 24, and I had chosen this area in Pakistan that was like a war zone, of course, because I had to do something different. So, you know, of course, a parent is never that excited to know that their child is going to climb alpine big walls in a war zone. So we had this special permission to get into this area from a general named General Tahir, and he got us in, and we were escorted in by these, you know, Pakistani Special Forces team. This was before 9/11. And we were climbing this wall, and it was in that era, we got it sponsored because we were one of those first teams to do kind of like satellite dispatches. So we were going to carry these dispatches, these satellite phones up the wall and shoot images back to the rest of the world. And so we're up there, and near the last day on the wall, I took this really big fall, and I cut my eye, like right above my eye, and it bled really severely, but it wasn't very bad. And my friends were like, "Oh, we gotta post this. This is like so dramatic, you know." And I was like, "Oh no, I can't do that. My mom will like completely lose her mind. Like, I just can't push it any further." And they're like, "Dude, you gotta let us do it." So we posted it, but before we did it, I called her on my sat phone, but I only got a message machine, so I was like, "Hey Mom, we're posting this photo. It looks really bad, but I'm totally fine." And then I hung up, and I just figured it was okay. They posted it, and the next day we're like climbing, and we look down the valley, and there's like this like platoon of people coming up the valley, and we're like, "Oh my God, you know, it's like the war must have escalated, you know, this could be really bad." And we're like watching them come up, and they come up right to the bottom of our wall, and the guy's on a loudspeaker, and he yells up at me, he's like, "Jimmy, Jimmy, your mother wants to know if you're okay." And I was just like, I couldn't believe, I was so embarrassed, and I was so angry. I was like the kid at school who doesn't want their mom to pick you up in front of school, but like around the corner. And I was just like, and it was hilarious because we climbed this like really gnarly alpine big wall. We name it after this general, and we come down, and the whole way out, all the soldiers, like I had no real, like, I didn't get like the respect I was looking for. They were all like, "How's your mother?" But my mom somehow got a hold of the general of the Northern Armies, which is like the most active front in Pakistan, and convinced him to send a platoon out to look for me. But anyway. I gotta burn through some slides. That story won't be too long. But anyway, so I grew up, my parents had very high expectations, you know, academically, and they were both immigrants from China, and so I had a lot of, you know, pressure to kind of follow a certain type of path, but I finished college. I went to Carleton in Minnesota, in Northfield, and I had discovered climbing, and I was completely smitten with climbing. And so I told my family and my parents, I was like, look, I'm just going to take 1 year off, and I'm just going to climb and ski and get it out of my system, and just relax, everything's okay. And of course, I moved to Yosemite and found my peer group. And, you know, I was like, oh yeah, you know, this is my new peer group. And I was just completely fell in love with the lifestyle of climbing and every aspect of climbing, and the focus and the drive it took, and the planning and the friendship and the partnerships and like everything about it. And so I really just embraced it. And you know, after a year, of course, my family and my parents were like, and then after the second year and a third year, and you know, so on and so forth, I ended up living out of my car for 7 years after college, like fully. And it was kind of like my parents' worst nightmare, essentially. They were like, but they also knew I had found something that was really special to me. And it was also during that time that I picked up a camera, and my friend, who is actually now the executive director of the Access Fund, which is a big climbing nonprofit, but Brady Robinson, he was aspiring to be a photographer, and he handed me his camera one day while we were climbing. He was showing me how to use it, and I took his camera and I shot a photo with it, you know, after he showed me how to use it, and then I handed it back, and then he tried to later on sell his photography, and he sold one image, and it happened to be the one that I took, and which he totally was mad, but now he likes to tell the story and tell everybody that he started my photography career, which is true. But I sold the photo for $500, and at the time I was like, you know, I could live on $500 for months because I live in a car. So I was like, whoa, this is amazing. Like, I only had to take one photo a month and I could do this forever. And you know, that's the kind of logic you have when you're 21 or whatever. And so that's my start with photography, which is not as romantic as saying, you know, I studied all these great photographers and I was passionate about it and I loved it from the beginning. It really was just a means to an end to keep climbing. Of course, that evolved over time, and you know, photography and filmmaking have become, you know, a really central part of my life, and kind of the creative endeavors and the creative process for me is, you know, equally as exciting as any sort of climbing that I do. So out of those years, I took the climbing that I was doing and the photography, and they basically became vehicles for me to see the world. And after that time in Yosemite, I was really aspiring to take what I learned in Yosemite and take it to the bigger mountains of the world, like to Pakistan and the Karakoram. And I started putting together expeditions when I was in my early 20s, and I learned a lot during that time. Just about, you know, putting together teams and trying to manage, you know, expectations and getting grants and sponsorships, and you know, it's a very strange confluence of things that have to happen to put together trips. And being an athlete's only a small part of it. And you know, I learned a lot about strategy and like how important it is to set yourself up for success, and how much planning, like serious planning, needs to go into trips. And I think that's lost on a lot of people, because you just see people climbing in the mountains, and you know, a lot of it comes